Hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be here with Bracken Barker of Barker's Bees. He's a beekeeper out in Utah. So Bracken, how did you get started in beekeeping?
Well, it started back, probably 2012 or 13-ish. My father and I, we own a 100-acre farm here, and we decided that we needed some bees on it because you got to have bees on a farm. And we bought a couple packages and installed them and got all the equipment and put them in the box, put them down by the river, actually in my river bend apiary that you've probably seen on the channel. That's where I first had the bees. We
Mhm.
didn't know what we were doing. We we stuck them in the box and walked away and came back in the fall. And we actually had quite a few make it through the winter. I caught a swarm one year, and that swarm did really well for us. Had it for a couple of years, but eventually it had to have been the varroa mites, and sickness caught up to them, or the queen. I didn't know at the time, and we lost them. And we didn't. My father at the time didn't want to invest any more money into it, and I was in a financial spot where I wasn't able to invest into it and to do it. So I took a break there for a while, and then about 3 years ago I decided to do it again, and this time I told myself that I was gonna be successful at it. And not that I'm super successful, but I dove into every book and every YouTube channel and
Mhm.
everything I could find to, I realized quick that it was like cattle. You gotta take care of them. You can't just put them in a box and leave them. So I started getting into it, and I fell in love with it, like most people, and that's it. Been doing it since.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're not the only one to get addicted and to kind of have that realization you're like, wow, man, there's a lot to this beekeeping. Like a lot of us beekeepers have that realization like this is never going to end. I'm never going to learn even remotely everything that I can.
Nope. And just when you start thinking you're figuring it out, it goes ahead and it humbles you a little bit, and you're like, okay, all right, I don't know as much as I thought I did.
It's like the best beekeepers are the ones that have the realization that the more I learn, the more I realize that I really don't know. Like that that's the real, you know, I think the realization that can really change your mind about beekeeping is when you start to learn more, you're like, well, we don't know this and we don't know that. And what about this? And some of those questions hopefully will be answered over time, but a lot of this stuff we're just never going to know. And that's kind of one of the parts of beekeeping that makes it so interesting.
Yeah, for sure. It's always a new challenge. It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started 3 years ago. What what are your goals for the rest of this year and coming into the next year, and just overall? Like, are you trying to grow to a certain amount of hives? Like, what is your plan?
Um, so at the beginning, I thought, oh, it'd be cool to get to 100 colonies or so, and I thought that'd be nice. And the more I do it, I'm realizing that my goal is to have quality over quantity. I heard somebody, I think it was on the Duck River channel. He interviewed a
Yeah,
guy at the Hive Expo. He says, I can't remember his name, and maybe you could help me out, but he said if I took 10 colonies and know what I'm doing, I can outperform somebody who has 50 colonies that don't know
yeah.
what they're necessarily
Might,
doing.
might have been Greg Rogers. Might have been. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't remember off top hand, but that really hit home with me. And I want quality. And my goal in beekeeping, it's not necessarily the honey, it's not necessarily the money. I just want to keep bees alive. I want to be successful at being able to produce bees, to maintain bees. That's what I like. I like being the caretaker. The honey is a bonus, the selling the queens is a bonus, but I want to be self-sustaining, and I just want to have bees. I want to do my own queens. I want to sell a couple packages and nukes here and there to help support the process. And last year I got a little bit over about 1,300 pounds of honey, and it was pretty good crop, and it helped me a lot. And the money was nice; it paid for most of my stuff, but I'm not really in it for that. I love how beekeeping and farming go hand in hand. I want to farm for the bees, and I want to have bees for the farm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that.
So that's kind of my goal, is to just have healthy bees and keep them alive. I want quality over quantity. So
Yep.
however many I can handle, that's what I'll take. And I know they say, you'll find your limit where you can take it. If you get to 50 and you can't handle 50, it'll knock you back to 20. So if 20 ends up being my number in the long run, so be it, as long as they're healthy and good.
How many colonies roughly do you have right now?
Roughly, I've got about 35 or 36, somewhere in there. Not counting my little nooks and stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good number. And I think there is a lot of truth to, you'll find out pretty quickly how many hives you can or cannot take. I've definitely heard some horror stories of how many people have lost when they don't have the right time for it. But I think as long as you're intentional, you obviously have a main goal in mind and you're driving towards that, whatever number that is, you'll figure it out over time. And just keeping those bees healthy, and healthy bees are, more of a joy to have, and they will pay for themselves as well.
Right.
So, Bracken, you have a pretty long season, right?
Yeah, well, it depends. It's pretty hit or miss. It starts in about May is when we start getting some of our first bloom, and most of our season is alfalfa. But the problem is the farmers, including myself, purple hay doesn't sell as good as green hay. So when we let it bloom out, it loses some of that value as far as, the hay product goes, but it benefits for the bees. So most farmers around here, they cut their alfalfa before it blooms, and we'll have a flow for just a little bit. They'll start blooming, the alfalfa will start blooming, and then they cut it and it's gone. So it's kind of a trickle, it seems like, from what I've noticed, that it's really all summer long, but it's not for very long periods of time.
Yep. Incredibly unpredictable is what it sounds like.
Yep. And some last spring, it rained so much, no farmers wanted to cut their hay, because purple hay sells better than black hay in that scenario, because they didn't want it to get wet and rained on. So nobody was cutting their fields, and the whole valley was blooming with alfalfa, and the bees were just going crazy.
Yep.
But this year, it's been so dry, we can't get any moisture. The ground is so hard, and even when the alfalfa does bloom, I don't think it's producing much nectar, because it's just so dry. So our season's I don't know what our season is, to be honest. It's here when it's here, and it's not when it's not.
I wasn't specifically referring to honey, just more as a general statement about like how many active months. And so I'd say you're relatively similar to us.
Yeah.
We get our dandelions blooming here in about early May.
Yep.
And then our last goldenrod stops blooming here typically in late September.
Yeah, see, and we don't have goldenrod, but we have a bush called rabbit brush, or rabbit bush. I can't remember which one it is. But it's a similar, I think it's similar. But it blooms really late in the fall, and the bees sure like that stuff. So
yeah.
And it probably ends in about September. So yeah, I'd say our seasons, we're not as humid as you are in Maine, but it's hot. We've had 100-degree weather the last 3 weeks. I don't think there's been a day where we haven't hit 100 degrees.
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah.
It is dry heat though, because when I'm up there working bees for the commercial beekeeping company I work for, like my whole shirt will just be covered in sweat, because when it gets to it gets to like 90. I think the hottest day I've been out there is like 95. Full bee suit on, the bees terrorizing me, and it's like close to 90% humidity, and that's where it gets real bad. Like that's where you just got to constantly be guzzling water to at all stay ahead of the heat. But yeah, we certainly don't get those kinds of temperatures here. I mean, sometimes we'll get a week in August, first week of August or last week of July, where it's 90s for almost a whole week, but we've been pretty good as of late as far as weather. It hasn't been. It's cooled down a lot. Now we're up north in Aroostook. I'm at home right now, but we're getting like 75-degree days right now, which is it's like perfect beekeeping weather. Warm enough for a honey flow. Yeah, warm enough for a honey flow, but not really so warm that you're just sweating your butt off.
Yeah, I went and helped Bruce down in Alabama a little while ago, and I won't complain about heat. I've since then I've been a lot more careful to say it's hot here, because it might be temperature hot, but it ain't humidity hot. And that, yeah, like you said, I bet I drank more water while I was there those 3 days than I have my entire life, it felt like. But I never felt full, like I could never get enough water in me. So
yeah. Beekeeping's like that. Each place has its own, subclimate, and it definitely affects the beekeeper and the bees. It's intense, and a lot of that. It's kind of interesting because we all get used to where we are, and so 100 degrees in dry heat for you is probably pretty normal. But if I felt that, I'd feel really out of my element. But if you're up here and it's 95 degrees, 90% humidity, you'd be like, wow, this is really not what I was looking for.
Right.
Granted, in Maine, like down here where I live in Mid-Coast Maine, our hottest day of the year is on average like July 29th. So it on average gets cooler after that point. So our summers we're really on the back end here at this point in August. And so hopefully it won't be too bad, but it's really interesting going 3 hours south. Up north, all the goldenrod's blooming, pretty much all of it. And now I'm back down here. It's like I was transported 3 weeks back in time, being down here. I can see it right now out on my lawn. My dad lets it grow all back near the fences, and it's just starting to bloom here. But up north, it's like almost all of it's in bloom.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's
cool. It's just a weird feeling. It's like, because every day I look and I'm like, oh wow, all the goldenrod's blooming. I did that for like 2.5 weeks, and then I come back here, I'm like, that's not right.
No goldenrod.
yeah. It's a weird feeling. But so you said the alfalfa, is that really your only main honey plant?
We have some Russian olive trees. I don't know if you can see them back there in the background. There's that gives us a little bit of a trickle. There's quite a few all along the river here. But they bloom fairly, or they're done now. But we have, what else do we have? Yeah, there's not a lot of plants that I'm super. That's one thing that I need to. That's a goal of mine to study, is to learn more about the flowers around here and what's in bloom. There's some Russian sage that's in bloom, and I know they're really hitting that. But for the most part, we have a lot of wild, like choke cherries.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all along the river. That's a good source. But yeah, I would dare say that alfalfa is 90% of the flow. We get dandelions, there's a lot of clover too, a lot of Dutch clover, a lot of red clover, but most of that's in the pastures out with the cows. But then if the cows are in it, they usually keep it grazed down enough that you don't get a lot of bloom off that. So there's a few stuff around, but it's just not. There's nothing that's super consistent. Like, we don't have a goldenrod season or what's that one down in Alabama that Bruce always talks about? Tallow. Like, we don't have, like, oh, get ready, the tallow's coming in. We don't have that. We have put the boxes on and let them collect all year.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got tallow, and then he's got a month or so of privet before that.
Privet. Yeah, that was the other one I was thinking of.
Yeah. So it is pretty different. We don't have a lot of great producers. The goldenrod, it's like it's like gambling when you're looking at a harvest from the goldenrod. Some years, like my first year of beekeeping, my bees filled up 2 full deeps of honey. That was it. They were good for the year. I didn't need to touch the feeder. Completely fine. Next year, I get to like late September, like September 21st, September 25th. I'm like, there's no honey in here. So I start feeding like crazy for 2 weeks, and I got enough feed into them. But that's what it's like here. It's like about a 50-50 shot whether you get it. And I thought it was maybe something weird with the soil where every other year they produce it. But then one of the years, I can't remember if it was one of the years where they weren't supposed to produce or were supposed to produce, but I thought it was either going to be boom or bust. And then I had one year that was in between. They made some honey, but it was only like 15 or 20 pounds. But here, the main advantage of the goldenrod is the goldenrod starts blooming at the 4th of July, and it blooms all the way till probably, like the last week of September-ish, maybe 20th of September, somewhere in there. And the bees pull pollen off of it. Not probably when it starts blooming, they're on other stuff, but by mid to late July, they are pulling pollen on it for a month and a half straight, just baskets and baskets and baskets of pollen. So do you have a pollen dearth? Like, what is it? What do you see coming into your colonies this time of year?
So this time it's mostly, and I've heard quite a few people say that they don't use corn pollen, but we got quite a few cornfields around here. And if you go out in a cornfield and I ought to make a video of that, and they get on those and they take the pollen. And to me, why would they be taking it if they don't use it? I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, corn, it might not be the best quality of pollen for them, but at the same time, it might be all they have." So they're bringing in a lot of corn right now, and that's pretty much. I don't know what else they'd even be pulling into pollen. I haven't seen a little bit of pollen for a while now. I checked my hives yesterday, and they had quite a bit of pollen. They're all sitting well on pollen, but again, that's one thing I need to study a little more. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but I do know when I go out into a cornfield, there's a lot of bees working those tassels and bringing in that pollen.
Yeah, it probably is corn. So I think they had kind of the right idea with that, but not quite there. So what Bob talks about is bees will go for like corn pollen or pine pollen or some of those like windblown pollens. They're the least nutritionally dense though. So when the bees have nothing else, they're like, all right, we're going to work the corn pollen. That's what we got. Otherwise, they do try to choose other sources. So
better quality.
Yeah, because the windblown pollen has a different chemical structure. Because it's supposed to be blown, it's not as nutritionally dense. And so they're getting that corn pollen because it's what they can. But it probably isn't the highest quality. So, but you're definitely right. They will work it if there's nothing else, they're going to do. Bees are always willing to do something more than nothing.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. You're a lot smarter on that side of the thing than I am. So.
Oh, I'm not smarter. I just listen to Bob Binney.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Yeah, so that corn pollen, we get a lot of different pollens up north, and the bees at the company I work for up in Aroostook County, Maine. So they're from about, I think it's like Linneus, Maine, all the way up to Mars Hill. So it's about an hour top to bottom, and they're all about 5 to 10 minutes off of Route 1. So you just if I have a map, there's about 45 yards, and here's the section on Route 1, and then they're all on the sides of Route 1 as you go up.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's actually gotten a lot worse. And the reason is pretty surprising is all the farmers used to plant a lot of clover. And so partially it's because the University of Maine has told them that planting clover puts nematodes into the soil. And I don't fully understand why that's bad for potatoes, but it has a negative impact on some of the potatoes. And so they're growing a lot less clover, though they do still grow some clover because they can turn it into feed mix. They actually plant alfalfa with it. And up here, we don't make anything on alfalfa, but the clover that's planted in with it, we are able to get a decent amount of honey off of that. But just the way the contracts work with the farmers, the companies really don't want to be held accountable for destroying the soils. And so they have it written into all their contracts. We want you to have, X amount fallow, X amount in production. And so the way their contracts work now, there is actually less clover because they don't want to be responsible for destroying the topsoil there. So the honey has gotten considerably worse over the years, but in spite of that fact, we still get pollen all summer long. So it's still a positive. Yeah, I should have uploaded it for here, but I can send it to you after. One of our yards, there's an organic sunflower farmer up there who does, like sunflower oil. And so he plants the fields in different places. So every year we have to go talk to him. Hey, Mr. Yost, where should we put the bees this year? And so we drove like 12 minutes north of the farm, and I was expecting it to be, this tiny little organic sunflower farm, 20 acres. And this guy's got like hundreds of acres, maybe 1,000 acres of different, he must've got some big corn contract for organic corn, massive cornfields. And then we went up 12 minutes up the road. And what I learned following farmers up there is all of them just gun it. I mean, all of them, every time. You're like trying to stay behind them, and they're just flooring it up these country roads. And so we get up to this field, and there's probably like 7, I don't know, I'm not good at estimating acreage, but a lot of acres. There's like 3 different fields of sunflowers. So I got some pictures, but we got about 40, 50 colonies right below the sunflower field. And it's just amazing. All of them just opened up, and it's this huge field. And sunflowers, my best guess, and I've talked to my boss about this, is that ornamental sunflowers, they make a lot of pollen, but not really any nectar. And so I thought that was true of all sunflowers, but really I think the ones that create stuff for seed oil, those ones are actually able to make a lot of nectar. And so I was seeing a lot of nectar there. It might have been more the goldenrod, but it was really beautiful when I was there last week.
Yeah, we do. Now that you say that, we do have quite a few wild sunflowers, but they're only, the heads only get this big on them, and they'll start blooming here shortly, but there's not a whole lot of them. But there are some sunflowers around here.
Do the bees work them?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, I bet you they get some pollen off that.
Yeah, they do, and that's, now that you say that, I do remember, because I have some pictures of some bees that are just covered head to toe.
Yeah.
In that yellow, how they buried on their face. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're trying to, they get it back onto their corbicula. Yeah. It's, I mean, sometimes they really get just completely covered in pollen. And one interesting thing that I've learned this year is like different plants, they have different amounts of the size of their pollen basket can be dependent on their plant. Like when we have our bees out on wild raspberries, my boss will always point out, he's like, if you look at them, they actually have less pollen on their pollen baskets than you would see on some other plants, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it's an interesting observation.
I wonder if you think it's because it's denser or heavier or something, so they can't. I don't know. That is interesting.
It could be that. It could be that per flower there's less nectar, there's a lot of nectar, but not a ton of pollen. And so you think they'd visit a certain amount of flowers, they'd be full of nectar, and I don't know if they'd keep foraging just for pollen. Gotcha. Maybe that could be why. But your idea is possible too. And it could be really anything.
Yeah, who knows? I'm just thinking out loud.
That's what podcasts are for, Bracken.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw that you sent your bees to almonds, or you have in past years. How has that gone for you? And is that something that you want to continue?
Yeah, so I've done it twice. And the first time I did it, I sent them with a commercial guy, and it went really well. Everything was sweet. Bees came back, and they were just busting out of the seams, just boxes full of bees. And the second time that I sent, they came back pretty decent, but I had some issues with the beekeeper that I had sent them with, and there was some miscommunication and some stuff that had gone on. So since that, I'm probably not going to go that route again with with that guy, but I'm trying to. I got another bee buddy. His name is Oki. He does queens. He's down there in Chico, California.
Mhm.
Super cool dude. He messaged me on Instagram one day and asked me a question, and him and I started talking, kind of just like that. We just developed a friendship over bees, and I talk to him fairly regularly. But he sends his bees into the almonds. I asked him if I could maybe bring them down and have him take care of them, because
Yeah.
I'm not, with my job and the farm and stuff, I'm not able to go down there and spend the whole time, putting them out, getting them, all that stuff. So I have to pay somebody to do that. But um, I want to do it again. I want to do it this year, but I might do it myself. I might haul them down myself. Last time we put them on a semi and hauled them out, but like I said, there was some issues there with, just some stuff that had happened that could happen with anybody. But I'm just choosing to go. I'm the type that I would rather do it myself and blame myself for screwing up than
Yeah.
having somebody else do it and then being upset with them, So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, so that's my plan. I don't know. I haven't 100% nailed it down if I'm going to send them this year, but I think I'm
Mhm.
going to.
Yeah. Yeah. So they just didn't look as good this year coming off of pollination.
They looked okay. They came back. They weren't as big as last time. They were a lot better than they would do being here in Utah. Like, that's for sure.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like you up there. When winter comes, they're surviving. They're not
Yeah.
living. They're surviving. At least if I can get them to California, they are doing something. But it was more personal stuff between me
Communication.
and
Yeah.
between me and the commercial beekeeper. Some stuff had gone on, and it wasn't necessarily because the bees did bad or anything. It's just because I've got to try to work with somebody a little different, if that makes
Yeah.
sense, without getting into too much,
Yeah.
detail. So
Yeah. Well, I hope you are able to work that out with your friend there in California.
yeah, I hope
I
so
know
too.
that it can be totally worth it.
Yeah, and it's not like you have to. I mean, you guys, if you do it, you guys send them clear across the country. Mine's 12
Yeah.
hours, and they're there.
The trucking costs are really
Yeah,
significant.
and I have where we got the farm. I've got a couple pretty good trailers, and I got a decent. I could haul them down on my own and save me quite a bit of money. Because that semi, they're a lot more expensive to run. But then again, if you're putting a lot of bees on there, the cost goes down quite a bit. But
Yeah. Yeah. It the company I work for, I think they typically send out like 2 or 3 loads, something like that, to almonds. But my boss is like, we really only do it, not really for the money, but for the getting those bees away. So when we send them out to almonds, they come back about the same as we did when we sent them there because of the travel in between. But if we had all those bees here in Georgia at the same time, they would all explode on us so fast that we wouldn't be able to split them all. So it's kind of like a
oh,
way to hold them so we have enough time, because we split all the bees that are stay before the other ones get back. And then when the other ones get back, we split all of those. So it kind of like lengthens out this time where we can split them without them swarming.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
I,
yeah,
I
that's a
never
good
heard,
that's a good
yeah,
strategy.
I'd never heard anyone say that before, but I was like, that makes complete sense, because getting enough people to split them all at the same time, because there'll be 3,000 plus colonies to split. So imagine
All
trying
at
to
once.
split all of those in like 3 weeks. Yeah, not going to happen.
Yeah. No thanks.
Yeah, it's intense for sure. Yeah, and he said, like, it's really hard to keep bees in boxes here. The flows in South Georgia, we're not like really far south in Georgia, but we're pretty far south. It's just so hard to keep them in the box. There's so many good flows and lots of pollen coming in, and so he said we'll feed them in January, and I was like, huh, that's interesting. But the only reason he feeds them, he's like, well, we feed them so they have enough honey frames so we can just split them without having to feed the splits. So we don't actually feed them to build them up or to keep them heavy, but we're just feeding them so they have enough honey frames so we can split.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a massive scale.
huh. Yeah, that'd be sweet.
It it will definitely be an experience. I'll head down in the new year after the Bee Expo, so it'll be quite a time.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I'm excited to see some. Hopefully, you can document some of your adventure down there.
Yeah, possibly. We'll see. So, we'll be feeding, this fall up here and next spring down there. How has your feeding worked? What times of year do you do it and why?
So I usually pull my honey on Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever day that is, it just because it gives me an extra day, and that's what my mentor Brad, he when I started getting into it involved, that's just when he did it. So that's when I've been doing it. And as soon as I pull them off, as soon as I pull the honey supers off, I'll feed them,
Yep.
and I'll just make sure they're good and full. One thing with sending them to California is they like to send them in 2 deep boxes.
Yep.
But if I stop going to California, I want to attempt to winter in single brood management. I want to do the single deeps,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just something I want to try. There's quite a few beekeepers in this area that are like, "Oh, you got to have 2 boxes to get through the winter. You got to have 2 boxes to get through the winter." I mean, I agree, but if Ian can put them in I know everything's so different in every
Mm-hmm.
scenario, and he's a lot more experienced. I'm not saying that I'm anywhere remotely close to what his skill level is, but like his winters, he keeps them in a shed longer than I do. Like mine at least get cleansing flights and get, so I don't see why I wouldn't be able to get some through the winter. And I actually have got a couple single boxes through the winter. Now, granted, it was a fairly mild winter. It wasn't, super brutal, but
Yep.
if I stop doing the almonds, I will try to do single boxes and do single brood management. That's kind of a goal I have.
It actually makes sense. I think it would make sense for you, Bracken, because you're all about quantity over quality. Well, I think you could get a lot more out of each hive. If your single is more intensive management, it's more feeding, but you get to pull more honey. So I think that might align with your goals pretty well in that sense. You get more out of each hive, but you have less hives and you do a little bit more intensive management, but you can get better bees that way. Like the way I try to describe it to people is, well, for context, she lives 8 minutes down the road. We overwintered a single deep 8-frame colony, her strongest hive the next spring, bursting out of the box.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was a very robust colony.
Huh.
So, people overwinter 3-frame nukes. There are people in Quebec that will overwinter 3x3x3s. They're literally covered in feet of snow. It's so much, their winter's so long there. So, people always like to say, you need 2 deeps. And that was what I was told in B class. But as Greg Burns always likes to say, there are no absolutes in beekeeping. And I think that applies here. Like you can do it if you want to, you can figure it out. And so like a lot of my colonies, for me, what the ideal would be if I have the time and I'm getting everything set up right, I would be able to pull the honey in early July. And then I get to feed them in those single deeps over the next few weeks. And then I get that one, I could possibly get some more drawn comb, like Cayman has a video about doing that. 2, you're just keeping them strong throughout that time where there's low amounts of nectar. And so if you fed them light syrup over those few weeks, you'd really get a strong cluster and you'd get to harvest more honey. So it just seems like there are definitely ways that you can leverage feeding with single deeps that's advantageous.
Yeah. It just makes, I think a lot of it goes back to his old, like my father, he's an old school farmer, and there's certain things that he, and that's fine. It's that you got to do it because that's how he's done it he's 70 something years old. So that's how he's done it for 50 years, and it works. I'm not saying overwintering in doubles doesn't work, because it obviously does, but I wonder if that's more why people do it. Maybe they're scared to try new things, or maybe it's just because it has worked.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean a single box
Couldn't
can't work
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
Like nobody's been able to give me Yeah, like they say, oh, it's because of feed. And I'm like, well, no, I don't necessarily agree with that, because you can pump them full of feed, like you just said. And I don't know, it's just all strategic and how you want
Yeah.
to, yeah, it's
One,
so different.
yeah, one way this is how I describe the difference between keeping singles and doubles. I'd say like singles is more like you're on a tightrope walk because of how you need to contract and grow the brood nest during times of food stress. So if you're coming out of winter, there's less margin for error with if you have 8 frames of honey and the box is full of bees, then you might have a problem with them building up because there's so much honey in the box. And so finding that right, and same thing when you're going into fall, you have to feed at the right time and at the right quantity so they slowly get the whole box filled as they constrict the brood nest into winter. And so, single deeps, it's not as scary as walking on a tightrope, but for this analogy, I'd say that's more like walking on a tightrope. And double deeps is like walking on, 2 2x4s. It's you got more room for error. You're able to feed less or more. There's just more flexibility. And same thing with when you're splitting, you have many more frames to choose from. And one thing that I've
Yeah.
learned, especially over the last year, is I actually prefer to make splits with frames that have like a half frame of brood. It's not like completely full top to bottom, because you're risking less and there's more of a chance the bees are able to keep it warm. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, it's more intensive, but just like anything, you can overwinter a 4-frame nuke. If it has plenty of food, got strong bees, got bees with low mites and low viruses, anything can overwinter anywhere. I mean, Etienne Tardif, he's up in like the Yukon and he overwinters nukes every year. So
Yeah. So there's
anybody
no
can do it.
reason I can't do it in Utah. Like
No, no, yeah,
that's
yeah, you
exactly
can
what
do
I'm
it.
getting at. Like there's plenty of people that do it other places. There's no reason I can. I'm not saying it won't take more work and more, like you said,
Yeah,
it will be that tightrope, but it can be done.
yeah, it can be done. Yeah, it's just all about what you want to put into it, what you want to get out of it, and
There's three
aligning that.
things. Correct. There's three things that I've been told that really has helped me in the beekeeping. There's three things bees need. They need to be dry, they need to have food, and they need to be healthy. If
Yeah,
you can get those three things figured out, you can be.
yeah,
But you know, when your bees get sick, or when they don't have enough food, or when they get wet because your lid. Not saying that they can't survive that way either, because I've seen videos, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you have one where maybe it was somebody else, but a lid got blown off during a storm and
yep,
the box got full and the bees were still alive. Like,
yep. All those hives made it through winter.
yeah, so I don't know. There's so many different ways. Like they say, the beekeeping thing, you ask 2 beekeepers, you're going to get 5 answers.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
At
But I
least.
mean, in the long run, that's no different than farming. I mean, I could ask
Yeah,
my neighbor how to farm or how to plant this and that, and there's 10 different ways to do it.
yeah, yeah,
But it's just
absolutely.
what works for you and what works for your time frame and your management abilities. If you don't have the
Yeah,
time to go out and feed the single box all the time, yeah, run doubles. Like,
yeah.
it's that simple.
Yep. This one phrase applies certainly to beekeeping and I think life at large. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. And so with
Yeah.
with single deeps, you get more honey. Well, that's always the debate. Do you get more honey or do you harvest more honey? I think it's mostly you just are able to harvest more honey, but you also have to be much more careful and you have to feed almost right after the harvest, because when you got that boom in single deep during the honey flow, they got probably at most 2 frames of honey in the bottom. And probably a lot of those 2 frames of honey are actually pollen too. So you got
Yeah.
much less, but if you're able to get in there, get some feed on them, and within a week, then they're still really strong and stimulated, ready to go. And so with deeps, you'll harvest less to that honey. But I was talking about this with my boss, and when you're doing double deeps, everybody's like, double deep brood box. But I have pretty much never seen a hive that is a true double deep during a honey flow. Pretty much every single time, I'd say at least 6 frames in the top box are just full of honey. And
Yep.
so, it's the bees are just going to naturally constrict the brood nest during the honey flow. Not to say that they may not have more frames of brood, they probably will, but a lot of it is just they make that deep, have a lot of honey, and which is good to have after the honey flow, but it's not really like they have 18 frame or 16 frames of brood during the honey flow. They got 10, maybe 12.
Right.
I know you did your first graft this year, and it's been 3 years, so we're pretty much on the same timeline. I started grafting I grafted in my third season and I failed, but my fourth season I got it right, and I've been grafting ever since. So what has been your experience with that, and have you really enjoyed doing it this summer?
Oh yeah, I think it's that's pretty sweet to be able to pick that larvae and to watch it. Again, I'm into the caretaking part. Like, I love raising animals. I love having that, and I'm definitely, it's a lot more intense than I thought it would be, but at the same time, it's not as hard as people think it is. Like, I was super double-edged because I thought, oh, I can't do it. That's so complex. It's not. I mean, it is, but it's doable. Like, just get out there and try it and do it. Like, if you fail, so what? Like, you're not going to be out anything. You're not that's how I was anyways. I took and made a queen. I took a single deep. I actually used a nook, a 5-frame nook the first time, and I shook a whole bunch of bees into it, populated it really well, put my grafts in there, and they did pretty good. But I didn't use. I love Bob Bedding's method. The way he does it is phenomenal. But I just don't necessarily have the resources to fill, that many bees like he does. He's got, so I kind of used the same concept. I just kind of made it smaller, but the second time I grafted, I think I grafted them. They were a little too big of larvae. I took a picture of them and I sent them to my buddy in California, Okie. And I says, hey man, what do you think of these? And he's like, a little big, little old. I was like, crap. So finding that sweet spot has been fun, but with those little mini styrofoam mating nooks, I've been having a sweet time, because if you followed some of those, I put my first graft in there. They hatched, they mated, she came back, she laid, I took the queen out, and they made queen cells in that little styrofoam nook, and I just let them go, and I've actually cranked out 2 or 3 queens out of each one of my little styrofoam nooks, and I haven't done anything. I haven't added more bees. I haven't done, and the Utah, Glade Sessions, he made a comment on one of my videos, like, as long as they're able to get that larvae enough food, even if it's just one queen cell that they feed and it does good, he says it'll be a good queen. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a whole double deep or a single deep of bees to raise a queen. Like, they raised a queen and it was a tiny little styrofoam box. Granted, there was quite a few bees in there, but I love the queen rearing. I love being self-sufficient. I love the idea of, oh, I've got a couple nooks, let me just go grab one. And sure, it might put a little bit more time, but man, it saves so much, money. And just, if I need a queen, I got to find somebody. I've got to, spend 40, 50 bucks, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, I got bees that'll make queens all day long.
Yeah.
Why not utilize it?
Yeah. How is your mating then?
I don't know a percentage, but I'd say it's probably a little less than, maybe half. My mating hasn't been super great. Let's see, I started out, let's back up a little bit. So my take, first time I grafted, I had like 36 something out of 45 take.
Yeah.
Well, then out of those 36 cells that were capped, like, only, I don't know, 20 of them hatched. And then out of those 20 that hatched, only like 12 of them mated and came back and was laying successfully. So, whatever that percent, I'm just ballparking numbers here, but it wasn't.
Well, yeah. So that'd be 60%.
Yeah. So and for my first year, I don't know, that's not terrible, but I told myself if I get one queen out of this process, I'll be happy, and I
Yeah.
was. Like I said, I'm not doing it for a large amount of queens. I just want, excuse me, I just want to be self-sustaining and be able to get, if I get a dozen, cool. If I get five, cool. I'll use them.
Hmm. So would you say you're like, I would say what's normal for most places around 70% mating. But do you think that was because it was your first time grafting? Do you think it was an issue with the queens, or do you think that you just don't get great mating where you are?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I would dare say it was probably more my fault than anything
Hmm.
because there's a fair amount of commercial beekeepers around this, so there's got to be. I don't get into the whole like. I think it's super cool. I just don't. But like the whole drone,
Hmm.
I just don't have the time and the. I just don't do that. So I just free cat. If they whatever bee they mate with, they mate with. I don't care. Like
Yeah.
drone. But there's quite a few yards around, my big yards that there's got to be enough drones around. So I don't think that's necessarily the issue.
Yeah.
So
Do you
I would
do you
dare
know
say it was
how
my fault.
Yeah. Do you know how close it is? Because speaking of drone flooding yards, it's about a mile and a half is around right. Mile and a half, 1 to 2 miles from your yards is about how far you want the drone flooding yards to be, or just other people's bee yards.
So that's probably about exactly. I can think of two right off top
Yeah.
hand. And they're probably within. Well, the one's probably a mile. It might be a little more than a mile, but yeah, there. I got two commercial guys, one over here and one over here, and they're within a mile. So I kind of just bank off that. They have their yards are huge. They've got 32 pallets or 40 pallets, whatever, and they're four ways. So
Yeah.
I'm not.
A lot of
Yeah,
bees.
quite. And I've got my little yard here, but so there's plenty of bees around. There's plenty of
Yeah.
drones in the area. So I don't think it was necessarily. I'm going to go ahead and say it was probably more my fault than anything.
Yeah. And you didn't have bad weather, right? You said it's been really dry.
Yeah, it's been super dry. We haven't had hardly any bad weather. We do get wind. We do get quite a bit of wind, but
Yeah, that could.
that's usually more in the mornings,
Mhm.
and it usually subsides by mid morning. But yeah, that could for sure be a factor.
Yeah. If
There's so many factors.
there are, yeah, they could definitely be getting blown off course, and it also, um, I think I partially just got really lucky this year, but I got like 90% mating this year
Yeah,
without
that's
having
so
any drone
cool.
flooding yards, and I couldn't believe it. But the one thing I did do differently is I placed them along a long tree line, all spaced out, 5, 6 feet away from each other, and alternating the direction of their entrances. And so I have a hard time believing that isn't at least a little bit part of my success, putting them on the tree line, changing the entrances back and forth. And there's also the nuke boxes are white, red, or blue. And then I had some other ones that are a different shade of red, look slightly different. So I think that combination of all those factors can make a difference. So like what I'm going to do for next year is all those white ones. I brought like 3 cans of spray paint, and I'm just going to spray paint the front of them different colors. And so,
Right.
is that going to make a massive difference? But no, if it makes a 2 to 5% difference, then
Then it's
that
worth it.
is so worth it. I mean, I'm going to get so many more queens in the long run from that.
Yep, exactly. And that's what I did with my little styrofoam boxes. I just took them out and I just took a whole bunch of random different cans of spray paint. I put
Yeah.
dots on some, I put stripes. I just made
Yeah.
every one different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Helped
yeah,
them figure it out.
I want to find that's another thing too is I want to find a better spot for my queen mating nooks. I did it
Yeah.
along a fence line behind some old equipment. And it did okay, but I need to find somewhere that's a little bit more that would
Yeah.
be better.
The less wind possible would be
Yeah.
ideal. If you could find the more sheltered spot, that would be perfect.
I got a spot on our farm that's down along the river that sits down kind of in a little, we call it the hollow, down in the hollow.
Yeah.
And I think down there would be a great spot, but I just, another thing that I choose is accessibility. Like,
Yeah. How is he? Yeah.
how easy because when our hay and our grass and our alfalfa start getting tall, we don't like to drive in it. Try to
Yeah.
stay out of it as much as possible. But those places you have to drive through it to get to them.
Hmm.
So I kind of picked a spot that was more accessible. But
Yeah. Yeah. When I'm talking to people, they're like, "Yeah, I want to get an out yard. Do you have any thoughts on that?" I'm like, accessibility, accessibility, accessibility.
yep,
It's the
that's
only
all that
thing that I've
matters.
found that really matters. You can
Yep,
talk about all the other things, but that's, I mean, by far and away the most important thing.
yeah, it is. And if it's not
Yep.
an easy access, it's just a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Whatever other reason you're going there, not worth it if it's not that accessible.
Exactly.
Yep. Well, thanks for doing this interview with me today, Bracken. Where can people find you?
Uh, I'm all over most social media just under Barker's Bees and Honey. I got links like on my Instagram and my Facebook, even TikTok. I got some videos, but YouTube, the channel Barker's Bees and Honey. Yeah, check it out. I'd love to. I don't know. My videos aren't super educational. They're pretty raw footage of me just beekeeping, and that's how I plan on keeping it. And it's sure been a fun adventure getting to know you guys, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this little interview. And I love the friendship that I've developed over bees.
Yeah.
All over the country. I've got Bruce. I've got you. I've got um, down in California, Okie.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to Ian a little bit here and there on just conversate, just short stuff. But it's just so cool.
Yeah.
There's a guy in Australia that followed my channel, and I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
And he was commenting and talking to me, and it's such a
It's a
cool thing to
weird,
be a
yeah.
part of this group.
It's a real, like, surreal feeling.
Yeah, it is.
When you see Ian's name on your live chat, you're like, man, I've really made it.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't done a live chat yet and haven't seen his name, but that's a good goal. There's one of my goals
Yeah.
is to get Ian on
There
my
you go.
live chat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this today, Bracken. I really, really had a good time talking to you.
Yeah, same with you, man. I appreciate it.